$28 million in bridal contracts began collapsing the moment Celeste Barlow laughed at Mara Whitlock's body on a live stream. Celeste thought the camera was only capturing a cruel little joke. A very large plus-size baker in a sugar-dusted apron, standing beneath crystal chandeliers, while rich women giggled at the idea of her ever wearing white. She did not know Lucien Veron's silent men were already inside Gilded Veil Hall, or that one black rose pressed in Amara's icing had just turned a bridal showcase into an underworld threat. The room was built to worship thinness. White marble floors gleamed beneath gold-framed mirrors. Ivory veils floated behind glass, and mannequins with impossible waists stood in perfect rows like frozen brides waiting to be chosen. Mara Whitlock moved through that world carrying the final tier of a 6-foot wedding cake against her broad, soft body, her arms steady, her breath controlled, her presence too substantial for anyone to ignore and too dignified for anyone decent to mock. But decency was not invited to Celeste Barlow's private showcase. Celeste stood near the champagne tower in silk the color of bone, pale and polished, smiling for the viewers watching from their phones. Beside her, Ivy Sloane tilted her camera just low enough to catch Mara's apron, her flower-marked sleeves, the heavy curve of her hips as she lowered the cake tier onto its hidden support. "Careful," Ivy whispered, loud enough for the nearest guests. "If she bumps the table, the wedding might need insurance." Delaney Price laughed into her glass. The sound traveled. Heads turned. Eyes slid over Mara with that familiar mixture of amusement and permission, as if her body had entered the room for public comment. Celeste stepped closer, her smile bright for the live stream and sharp for Mara alone. "Stand by the gowns, darling," she said. "People should see why some women make wedding cakes instead of wearing wedding dresses." The laughter came softer this time, more nervous, because even cruelty could feel expensive in a room like that. Mara felt the words land exactly where Celeste wanted them to land. In the old place. The dressing rooms that never carried her size. The bridal clients who praised her hands but never looked her in the eye. The mirror she had learned not to apologize to. Her fingers tightened around the silver icing comb in her apron pocket, the one her father had left her, engraved with 4 small words: "Make beauty hold." She did not cry. She did not step back. She placed one palm against the bottom tier and felt the cake shift. Not from her weight. From sabotage. One support peg was too short. One side of the base had been shaved clean, just enough to fail under heat and light. Mara's expression did not change, but her body became still in a way the room misread as shame. It was not shame. It was calculation. She slid her silver comb along the seam of royal icing, pretending to smooth a flaw, and saw it beneath a cluster of black sugar roses, a seal she had not made, pressed too deep, too clean, shaped like a rose with thorns that did not belong to any bridal house. Across the showroom, 3 men in dark suits stopped moving at once. The champagne noise faded. The elevator doors opened without a sound. Lucien Veron stepped out in black, pale-skinned, cold-eyed, and silent enough to make wealthy people remember fear. He did not look at Celeste. He did not look at the camera. His gaze went to Mara's steady hand holding the collapsing cake upright, then to the false black rose under her silver comb. Only then did his voice cut through the hall, low and lethal. "Who touched my wife's cake?" Mara's heart struck once hard, because the word wife had just silenced every woman who had mocked her, but the mark beneath her hand told her something worse. This was not decoration, and someone had used her cake to threaten the most dangerous man in Philadelphia. The threat sat beneath Mara's palm, hidden in sugar, while the word wife still echoed through a room that had spent the last 5 minutes treating her like a joke. No one moved. Not Celeste. Not the women with champagne glasses frozen near their lips. Not the hotel coordinator who had been smiling at Mara like hired help until Lucien Veron's voice turned the air sharp enough to cut. Mara kept one hand braced against the lower tier of the cake, feeling the slight tremor in the sabotage support peg, and forced her breathing to stay even. If she pulled away too fast, 6 feet of white fondant, black roses, and evidence would collapse across the marble. If she spoke too fast, Every powerful person in the room would hear fear instead of truth. Miss Whitlock, the coordinator hissed, suddenly finding courage because it was easier to blame a baker than look at a mafia boss. Step away from the display. You've already damaged the base. The words landed with a familiar weight. Mara was used to rooms deciding her body was the problem before her hands had done anything wrong. She was a large white woman in a world that preferred women decorative, narrow, and silent, and her size made every movement seem guilty to people who had already judged her. When she carried something heavy, they called her clumsy. When she stood still, they called her in the way. When she took up space, they acted like space had been stolen from them. But Mara did not step away. Her broad shoulders squared beneath the flour-dusted coat. Her soft, full body became an anchor beside the tilting cake. Not an accident, not a weakness, not something to apologize for. "If I let go," she said quietly, "your display falls." A nervous whisper moved through the guests. Celeste's smile flickered, then returned too fast. "How convenient," she said, turning slightly toward the livestream camera, as if she could still control the room by performing innocence. The baker ruins the centerpiece, then invents a tragedy to make herself important. Mara's fingers brushed the engraved handle of her father's silver comb. "Make beauty hold." She wanted to say that beauty had weight, that structure mattered, that the things rich women called effortless were usually held up by invisible labor and aching hands. Instead, she looked down. There, near the black rose seal, a faint dusting of edible pigment had caught in the seam. Not charcoal, not standard luster powder. It had a blue-black shine she had only seen once before on a premium invoice Barlow Vale House had refused to pay in full. Imported obsidian sugar dust. Batch number BVH-17. Celeste's private stock. Mara's pulse changed. She did not have the whole answer. Not yet, but she had one sharp edge of it. Someone had used Barlow materials on her cake after it left her shop. Someone had touched her work, altered it, and planned for the world to watch her take the blame. Across the room, Lucien Veron watched her as if the crowd had vanished. He was pale, immaculate, and still, his black suit untouched by the panic spreading around him. Two of his men angled closer, but he lifted two fingers and stopped them. He was not saving her yet. He was studying her, studying the way she held the cake without shaking, the way she did not beg, the way her eyes moved from the seal to Celeste's hands, then to the smear of blue-black dust caught beneath Celeste's diamond bracelet. For the first time that night, Mara saw something in his expression shift. Not softness, recognition. "I didn't damage it," Mara said, her voice low but steady. "And whoever did was wearing gloves powdered with black sugar." Celeste went very still. The camera in Ivy's hand dipped. The coordinator opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Lucien's gaze followed Mara's to Celeste's bracelet, and the silence in Gilded Vale Hall changed shape. It was no longer laughing at Mara. It was waiting to see why the most underestimated woman in the room had noticed what everyone else had missed. Lucien's gaze followed Mara's to Celeste's bracelet, and every laugh that had filled Gilded Vale Hall a minute earlier seemed to crawl back into the throats that had made it. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. One small movement of his hand sent two men in black suits away from the champagne tower and another to the glass doors, where he turned the gold lock with a soft click that made several women stop breathing. "Phone's down," Lucien said. That was all. Ivy Sloane lowered her live stream like it had caught fire. The hotel coordinator went pale. Even Celeste Barlow, who had been trained since birth to smile through scandal, looked suddenly aware that beauty, money, and the right last name did not outrank Lucien Veron in a room he had decided to own. Mara stayed where she was, one hand still holding the cake steady, her large body planted beside the display like the only honest structure in the room. The guests kept looking at her, but the judgment in their eyes had changed shape. Before, they had seen a fat baker taking up too much space in a bridal hall. Now they saw the same woman refusing to move while armed men quietly rearranged the exits around her. It made them uncomfortable, the idea that someone they had dismissed might understand the danger before they did. "Mr. Veron," the coordinator whispered, trying to recover the hierarchy she understood. I assure you, our contracted vendor will be removed immediately. Mara felt the humiliation sting, but she did not flinch. Contracted vendor. That was all women like her ever became in rooms like this. Hands without a face, labor without a name, someone useful until visible. Lucian's pale eyes shifted to the coordinator. Say her name. The woman swallowed. Mara Whitlock. Again, a silence opened, sharp and public. Mara Whitlock, she repeated, smaller this time. Lucian said nothing else, but the correction moved through the room like a blade sliding back into its sheath. It was not rescue, not tenderness. It was a rule being enforced. In his presence, people did not erase what he was studying. Mara noticed the third bodyguard then, the youngest one, standing near the service corridor with his right hand too close to his jacket and his left shoe dusted with the same blue-black shimmer caught under Celeste's bracelet. Not enough to accuse. Enough to remember. His eyes flicked once toward the freight elevator, then toward Celeste, and Mara understood something cold and practical. Whoever had altered her cake had not come through the front of the showroom. They had used the route only staff and security were supposed to know. Her father's silver comb pressed in her palm as she adjusted her grip, pretending the shift was only to save the icing seam. In truth, she turned the cake a few inches away from the warm chandelier light. If the fondant softened too quickly, the fall seal would sink and the evidence would blur. Lucian saw the movement. His eyes dropped to the angle of the cake, then to the heat lamps above it, then back to Mara's face. Something almost like approval passed through him, gone before anyone else could name it. Cut the lights over the display, he ordered. A hotel technician obeyed, so fast the chandelier dimmed before Celeste could object. The showroom fell into a colder glow, all marble, diamonds, and fear. Celeste's smile finally cracked. This is absurd, she said, stepping forward as if offense could become power again. She was alone with that cake. She touched it. She staged this because she couldn't stand being reminded what she is. Mara's throat tightened, but her hand remained steady on the tier. Lucian did not look away from her. He had just watched her notice the route, the heat, the dust, the lie. And when Celeste lifted her chin and pointed one perfect finger at Mara, the accusation landed in front of the entire room with no way to take it back. That woman forged the Verone seal. That woman forged the Verone seal. Celeste's accusation struck the hall harder than any slap could have, because it gave every cruel thought in the room permission to become official. The women who had been laughing at Mara's body a moment earlier now looked at her as if her size, her apron, her flower-marked sleeves, and her working hands were proof of guilt. A baker did not belong near a mafia seal. A woman like Mara did not belong beside Lucian Verone. Celeste knew exactly what she had done. She stepped closer to the cake, careful not to touch the icing, performing fear for the only audience she still had left, the room. Look at her, she said, not to Lucian, but to every guest desperate for permission to doubt Mara again. She was humiliated. She was angry. She wanted attention. And now, suddenly, she is standing over a damaged Verone seal, pretending to be important. Mara felt the words hit the softest places inside her, but her palm stayed firm against the lower tier. The cake leaned into her weight like it trusted her more than the people who had paid for it. Her throat tightened once. Then she swallowed it down. She had learned long ago that if a large woman raised her voice, they called her aggressive. If she cried, they called her pathetic. If she stood still, they called her guilty. So Mara stood still like a locked door. I didn't forge anything, she said. Celeste smiled. Of course you didn't. You just happened to be the only person large enough to block everyone's view while the seal appeared. A few guests gasped. Ivy covered her mouth, but her eyes gleamed. Delaney whispered something that made two women look down at Mara's hips and then quickly away, embarrassed by their own obedience to cruelty. The hotel coordinator took a step toward Mara. Miss Whitlock, maybe it would be best if you came with security until this is sorted out. The word security changed the air. Mara saw the trap. If she let go, the cake would fall and destroy the mark. If she refused, they would say she resisted. If she moved with the comb in her pocket, Celeste would say she was hiding the tool used to make the seal. Across the room, Lucien Veron had not moved. His face was cold enough to make lesser men apologize for breathing, but he did not rescue her. Not yet. His right hand tightened once around the black onyx ring, then relaxed. His bodyguards waited in a line of dark suits and lowered eyes, not because they were unsure, but because their boss was watching what Mara would do under pressure. Celeste noticed the silence and mistook it for permission. She reached into Mara's apron pocket and pulled out the silver icing comb before Mara could stop her without letting the cake collapse. The room saw the engraved handle. Make beauty hold. For 1/6 second, Mara felt 12 years old again, standing in her father's bakery while brides chose thinner girls to hold sample trays because they looked better in photos. Celeste turned the comb between two fingers like it was something dirty. "How touching," she said. "A little tool for a little dream. Tell me, Mara, did you imagine if you carved your way into his world, he might actually want you there? Women like you get hired for weddings. You don't become the wife." The silence after that was ugly. Even the women who hated Mara seemed to understand Celeste had gone too far. Lucien's eyes lifted from the comb to Celeste's face, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. But Mara was no longer looking at Celeste. She was looking at the underside of the silver comb, where a smear of blue-black sugar dust had transferred from the false rose seal to the engraved groove of her father's words. The dust had caught in only one place, not across the teeth, not along the handle, but inside the tiny carved letter V. Mara's breathing slowed. If the seal had been made with her comb, the dust would be everywhere. If it had only touched the surface after the forgery was already there, the pattern would prove it. Celeste had just handed her the one object that could clear her name, and Lucien Veron was staring at Mara like he knew she had seen it. Lucien Veron was staring at Mara like he knew she had seen it, but Mara did not look to him for permission. The silver comb sat in Celeste's fingers, its engraved words catching the cold showroom light. And for one terrible second, every woman in Gilded Vale Hall seemed ready to believe that a fat baker with aching arms and flour on her sleeves had tried to carve her way into a world that hated her shape. Mara let the silence stretch just long enough for Celeste to feel safe inside it. Then she said, softly, "Turn it over." Celeste blinked. "Excuse me." Mara's palms stayed braced against the cake. The sabotage tier leaned harder now, warmed by the lights, its weight pressing down through the damaged peg. Mara shifted her stance, planting her feet wider beneath her, using the solid strength of her body the way she used it every dawn in her kitchen, when 40-pound sacks of flour had to be lifted and sugar sculptures had to survive gravity. The room had mocked her for taking up space. Now that space was the only thing keeping the evidence from crashing to the floor. "Turn the comb over," Mara repeated. "If I forge that seal with it, the dust will be packed between the teeth. Royal icing holds powder in grooves. It doesn't choose one letter on a handle." The whispers thinned. One of Lucien's bodyguards glanced at another, not confused now, but listening. Celeste's smile tightened. "You expect us to take a baker's word over mine?" "No," Mara said. Her voice trembled at the edge, then steadied. "I expect you to look." A small social horror passed through the women around them. The realization that the woman they had been laughing at was asking for inspection, not mercy. Celeste tried to pull the comb back, but Mara's free hand moved first. Not fast, not violent, just certain. She caught Celeste's wrist with flour-dusted fingers and stopped it in midair. The gesture was small. The effect was not. Celeste was slim, jeweled, polished, used to rooms bending around her. Mara was broad, soft, heavy, and immovable, her hand closing around that delicate wrist with the calm pressure of someone who had spent years carrying things no one else wanted to touch. Celeste's breath hitched. Mara released her immediately, but the power shift had already happened. "I'm not hurting you," Mara said. "I'm stopping you from hiding evidence." The room went completely still. Lucien's eyes darkened. His thumb brushed the black onyx ring once, slowly, as if he were memorizing the exact second Celeste lost control. "Show it," he ordered. Celeste had no choice. She turned the comb. The underside gleamed clean except for one thin smear of blue-black sugar dust trapped inside the carved V of the word beauty. The teeth were silver, untouched. Not one groove held enough pigment to press a seal. Mara looked at the coordinator. That comb touched the surface after the mark was already there. It didn't make it. A technician near the display leaned closer despite himself. Ivy lowered her phone another inch. Delaney's cruel little smile faded into something almost like fear. Mara did not stop. She slid her free hand along the cake board and felt the shortened support peg shift again. The whole tower shuddered. A gasp broke from the guests. Celeste stepped back, and in that instant her diamond bracelet scraped the edge of the black sugar rose. A fresh streak of blue-black dust appeared along the stones. Mara saw it. Lucian saw Mara see it. Before anyone could speak, the young bodyguard near the service corridor took one careful step toward the locked freight elevator. Mara's voice cut through the room, low and clear. He's leaving with the missing support peg. Lucian did not turn his head. He did not need to. Every guard in the room moved at once. And for the first time all night, no one was looking at Mara like she was too much. They were looking at her like she had just become dangerous. They were looking at Mara like she had just become dangerous. And Lucian Veron noticed every face that changed first. The women who had laughed at her body now held their breath around it. The coordinator who had tried to remove her suddenly could not meet her eyes. Even Celeste Barlow, still clutching the silver comb like stolen evidence, looked toward the service corridor with the first real fear of the night. Lucian did not turn when his guards seized the young man near the freight elevator. He only lifted one finger, and the guard stopped struggling so abruptly it looked as if the air itself had tightened around his throat. A short wooden support peg fell from inside his jacket and rolled across the marble, leaving a thin trail of blue-black sugar dust behind it. The sound it made was tiny. The silence that followed was not. Mara kept her hand on the cake, her body still braced against the weakened structure, her breath slow despite the ache burning through her arms and lower back. She wanted to let go. She wanted to snatch her father's comb away from Celeste and hold it to her chest like something sacred. But professionalism was the only armor she had been allowed to wear in rooms that treated her softness like failure. So she stayed steady. She held the cake. She held the room. Lucian looked at the support peg, then at the false seal, then finally at Mara, as if seeing her had become more important than seeing the crime. Mara Whitlock, he said. Her name in his mouth made every guest understand the hierarchy had shifted again. Not sweetheart, not baker, not vendor. Her name. Mara lifted her eyes. Yes. Lucian stepped closer, stopping just outside the space her body and the cake occupied. He did not crowd her. That restraint, from a man who clearly owned fear like property, was more unsettling than any touch. If that seal were real, he asked quietly, where would it break? Celeste's lips parted. Lucian, she can't possibly. His eyes moved once, and Celeste stopped speaking. Mara looked down at the black rose pressed into the icing. Her father had taught her that expensive symbols always pretended to be delicate, but real craftsmanship hid stress points where only makers knew to look. She had seen the Veron pattern once before on a damaged sugar plaque delivered to her shop in a locked velvet box. She had repaired it without asking why it came with armed men. Not in the flower, Mara said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. A real Veron seal breaks at the thorn. The rose is decoration. The thorn carries the pressure. Lucian's face did not soften. Something more dangerous happened. He believed her. One of his older lieutenants glanced sharply at him, as if shocked that a woman in a Flower Street coat had answered a question men in his world died for misunderstanding. Lucian held out his hand towards Celeste without looking at her. Give it back. Celeste hesitated. The mistake lasted less than a second, but everyone saw it. A bodyguard moved forward. Lucian stopped him with two words. Not you. Then his gaze returned to Celeste. Her comb. Her hand. Humiliation flushed Celeste's perfect face as she placed the silver comb back into Mara's palm. Mara's fingers closed around the engraved words, and for the first time all night, the object did not feel like a memory of being underestimated. It felt like proof that she had survived long enough to be useful to herself. Lucian lowered his voice. Can you keep the seal visible until my men document it? Mara's arms trembled. She could have said no. She could have let them all see how much it hurt. Instead, she adjusted her stance, using the strength of her large body to counter the slant of the cake, and nodded once. Cut the side panel from the base. Don't touch the icing. Photograph the peg beside it, and move the heat lamps another foot back, where the dust pattern will bleed. No one laughed. No one whispered. The technician obeyed her before looking to Lucian, then froze as if he had just realized what he had done. Lucian saw that too. His mouth barely moved, but the order was absolute. Do what she says. That was the moment Mara felt the room tilt in a way no sabotaged cake ever could. Not victory, not safety, something more dangerous. Trust from a man whose trust could ruin families. Then Lucian's phone vibrated. He read one message, and the cold in his eyes became lethal. He turned the screen just enough for Mara to see a photograph of her small bakery, Briar and Butter, its front window marked with a black rose and spray paint. Beneath it was one sentence: "Keep the baker quiet, or the next seal goes on her door." Lucian slipped the phone away and spoke without raising his voice. "Mara stays with me now. Mara stays with me now." The words moved through gilded Vale Hall like a locked door closing, and Mara felt every eye return to her body. Not with laughter this time, but with the stunned discomfort of people watching a woman they had tried to erase become the center of a dangerous man's decision. Two guards stepped toward her as if to take her by the arms. Lucian stopped them with a look. "She walks." Mara lifted her chin, still holding her father's silver comb, still feeling the ache in her shoulders from keeping the ruined cake alive long enough to expose the lie. "I'm not luggage," she said, low enough that only Lucian and the nearest bodyguard heard. "And I'm not staying anywhere because a man orders me to." For the first time, something almost human passed across Lucian Veron's cold face. Not amusement, respect, sharpened by danger. He leaned close enough for Mara to smell cedar, gunmetal, and expensive wool, but not close enough to trap her. "Then stay because someone marked your bakery," he said, "and because every person who laughed at you tonight just learned you see what my own men missed." The elevator he led her to was not the gold one guests used. It was a private steel lift behind a mirrored panel near the service corridor, opened by a black key card one of his men produced without speaking. As Mara crossed the showroom, the social order shifted in small, humiliating ways for everyone except her. The coordinator stepped back. Ivy lowered her phone completely. Delaney stared at the floor. Celeste stood rigid beside the cake, her perfect face pale with fury as the guard who had carried the missing support peg was forced to his knees near the marble wall. Mara did not look away from any of them. Her large, soft body filled the aisle between silk gowns and champagne glasses, and for once she did not twist sideways to make herself easier to pass. The room moved for her. Inside the elevator, the space became brutally intimate. Lucian stood beside her, not touching, one hand resting near the emergency stop, the other holding his phone with the image of Briar and Butter still glowing on the screen. Mara stared at her vandalized storefront, at the black rose sprayed across the glass where she had once painted tiny buttercups herself. Her throat tightened, but she did not let her voice break. "My ovens are still on timers," she said. "There's a proofing cabinet full of dough. If your men storm my shop, they'll ruin 2 days of work and scare Mrs. Alvarez upstairs." Lucian looked at her then, truly looked, as if danger had expected panic and found logistics instead. "Address." Mara gave it. He sent one text. "No sit-ins. No broken door. 2 men outside. 1 baker-friendly locksmith if needed." Baker-friendly? Someone who does not touch proofing cabinets. Against her will, Mara almost laughed. It died before becoming softness. The elevator opened into a windowless security room lined with monitors, black marble counters, and a long steel table where evidence bags waited under cold white light. On the center table lay a book bound in black vellum, its edges worn by hands that had signed away fortunes, marriages, and blood debts. Lucian did not open it fully. He turned only one page, then slid a sealed pouch toward Mara. Inside were 3 sugar plaques, each stamped with a rose. "Tell me which one is real." A bodyguard shifted, visibly disturbed. "Boss, that ledger is—" Lucian did not look at him. "She touches what I tell her she touches." Mara stared at the plaques, then at him. "If I do this, I do it as Mara Whitlock of Briar and Butter. Not as your hidden witness. Not as your decoration. Not as your excuse to control where I breathe." The silence that followed was different from the ballroom's. This one had heat in it. Lucian's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with the effort of letting someone draw a line he wanted to cross. "Agreed," he said. Mara picked up her silver comb and examined the first plaque. The rose was beautiful. Too beautiful. The thorn was wrong. Before she could speak, every monitor in the room flickered black. Then one image appeared across all screens. Celeste Barlow standing beside a man Mara had never seen, his hand resting on a ledger page marked with a black rose and Mara's bakery address. A distorted voice filled the room. "Bring the baker to the hearing, Lucian, or we burn the vows with her inside." The distorted voice died, but the threat stayed alive on every black screen. "Bring the baker, or burn the vows with her inside." Lucian's security room became motion at once. Men reaching for weapons, phones, exits, orders waiting behind clenched jaws. Mara looked at the image of Celeste beside the unknown man and felt fear strike low in her stomach. Not for herself first, but for the small shop window, painted with buttercups, the dough rising in her proofing cabinet, and the apartment upstairs where Mrs. Alvarez slept with the television too loud. Lucian turned toward his guards. "Lock down Briar and Butter." Quietly. Then he looked at Mara. "You do not go to that hearing." Mara's fingers tightened around the silver comb. The old version of her would have been grateful to be hidden. The version Celeste wanted the world to see would have stepped back, softened her voice, made herself smaller, so powerful people could decide whether she deserved safety. But the black rose on her bakery door had changed something. "They're using my name," Mara said. "My cake, my tool, my shop. If I'm not in that room, they get to tell the story without me." Lucian's eyes darkened. "That room is not built for mercy. Neither is a bridal showroom," she said. For one dangerous second, no one moved. Then Lucian gave one short order. "Bring the car." The hearing was not in a courthouse. It was 3 floors below the hotel, inside an old wine vault converted into a private chapel of black stone, red velvet chairs, and a long table where men in tailored suits sat like judges who had never needed laws. Celeste stood near Rowan Keene, a silver-haired rival boss with pale eyes and a smile too calm to be honest. When Mara entered beside Lucian, the whispers started before her name did. They looked at her body first, at the width of her hips beneath the flower-dusted black dress, at the softness of her arms, at the way she filled the aisle between velvet chairs without apology. Then they looked at Lucian walking half a step behind her, not ahead, and the whispers lost confidence. Rowan lifted a sheet of black vellum. "This page proves Miss Whitlock forged a Veron marriage seal to manipulate Lucian into protecting her." Celeste's smile returned, brittle and desperate. She wanted to be chosen so badly, she invented a vow. Mara felt the room tilt toward humiliation again, but this time she did not brace for impact. She stepped toward the table. A lieutenant blocked her path. Lucian's voice cut through the vault. "Move." The man moved. Rowan placed 3 sugar plaques under a glass lamp, heating them fast enough to blur the dust pattern before anyone could inspect it. That was his mistake. Mara saw the shine change. "Turn off that lamp," she said. Rowan ignored her. The plaques began to sweat. Mara moved before Lucian's men did. She caught the heavy glass evidence cover with both hands and dragged it off the heat plate, using the full strength of her body to anchor it against the table when Rowan's man tried to shove it back. The impact jolted through her shoulders, but she held firm, broad and steady, and impossible to push aside. "Sugar tells time," Mara said, breathless but clear. "Real royal icing dries matte from the inside out. That seal is glossy at the thorn because it was pressed less than an hour ago." Silence hit the vault. Mara lifted her silver comb and pointed, not at the rose, but at the edge of the vellum page. And black vellum curls when fresh, edible alcohol hits it. "That page was stamped tonight, after my cake left my shop." A nervous glance passed between Celeste and Rowan. Lucian saw it. So did every man at the table. Mara leaned closer, her voice quieter now, more lethal, because it was no longer asking to be believed. You didn't forge my work perfectly. You copied the flower because you thought decoration was the vow. But the vow is in the thorn. She turned the plaque, exposing the break line. Smooth, rounded, wrong. Then she placed beside it the tiny support peg, dusted blue-black from the showroom floor. The patterns matched. Celeste's face emptied of color. Rowan's smile finally died. Lucian stepped to Mara's side, not in front of her, and laid the black onyx ring on the table like a verdict waiting to happen. "Say it," he ordered, but his eyes stayed on Mara. Mara looked straight at Celeste. "The Barlow seal is fake. The Verone page is fake. And the man who helped you hide the missing support peg brought Rowan Keene's dust into my cake." The vault went silent, and every head turned toward Celeste as if the first stone of her empire had just cracked. Every head turned toward Celeste as if the first stone of her empire had just cracked. And for once the woman who had made a career out of perfect entrances had nowhere beautiful to stand. The black vault held its breath. Rowan Keene's men looked at the false page, then at the sugar plaque, then at the tiny support peg dusted blue-black beside Lucian's onyx ring, and the loyalty in their faces began to calculate its own escape. Celeste tried to laugh, but it came out thin and wrong. "This is theater," she said. "A baker's little performance." Mara did not raise her voice. She stepped closer to the long table, her large body steady beneath every stare that had once tried to shrink her, the silver comb resting in her palm like a relic and a weapon. "No," she said. "Theater is making a woman stand beside wedding gowns so people can laugh at the body you think disqualifies her from being loved. Evidence is different." The silence after that was clean enough to cut. Mara placed the comb beside the fake seal and turned it so the engraved words faced upward. "Make beauty hold." My comb never pressed that seal. The dust caught in the letter V because Celeste touched it to the surface after the forgery was already made. The plaque broke wrong. The vellum curled fresh. The support peg came from the same dust batch. And Celeste's bracelet carried the transfer before I ever got my comb back. One of the older men at the table leaned forward, his expression no longer amused. "Barlow Vale House imported that dust." Mara looked at him. "Batch BVH 17. Private stock. Ask her warehouse manager why the BVH 17 invoice was rerouted through Rowan Keene's event company this morning." Celeste went white. That was the final crack. Phones appeared on the table, not for gossip now, but for orders. A hotel owner quietly canceled every Barlow reservation for the next 6 months. An insurance broker closed a leather folder and said Barlow Vale House would be reviewed for fraud by sunrise. 2 underworld families who had booked weddings through Celeste's empire stood and walked out without looking at her. Rowan reached for the fake ledger page, but Lucian put one hand over it. "Nothing dramatic. No shouting. Just possession." "You used her work to forge my vow," Lucian said, his voice low enough to make every powerful man listen harder. "You used her body as a distraction. You used her name as a threat. Now you lose every room my name opens." Celeste turned to Mara then, all polish gone. "Please," she whispered. It was not an apology. It was a woman asking the person she had mocked to stop the floor from disappearing beneath her. Mara looked at her for a long moment. She remembered the laughter, the camera, the mannequin, the sentence meant to bury every lonely ache she had ever carried. Then Mara picked up her silver comb. "You can leave," she said calmly, "but not through the bridal entrance. Vendors use the service corridor, remember?" A sound moved through the vault, not laughter, not applause, but something more satisfying, recognition. Celeste's face crumpled as the guards opened the lower door, and the empire that had dressed thin women in white while making women like Mara invisible began closing behind her, contract by contract, room by room, name by name. Lucian waited until she was gone before he opened the black vellum ledger. He did not write over the forged page. He tore it out, laid a clean one beneath Mara's hand, and wrote her name in black ink so permanent it looked like a wound the room would never forget. Mara Whitlock. "This house does not hide the woman who saved its name," he said. Then, in front of every man who had doubted her and every woman who had looked through her, Lucian Veron placed the black onyx ring beside her silver comb. "Mara Whitlock keeps the vows now. No seal stands unless she says it holds." Mara felt the rune change around her. Men who had not known where to look when she entered now lowered their eyes in respect. The velvet chairs seemed smaller. The aisles seemed wider. Her body, once treated like an inconvenience, had become a fact no one could negotiate with. Soft, strong, visible, unmovable. She did not become cruel. She did not become smaller either. She placed her palm on the clean page beside her written name and said, "Then the first rule is simple. No woman gets mocked at the altar of my house." Weeks later, at the reopened Gilded Veil Hall, Mara walked in beside Lucian wearing deep black satin and carrying the silver comb openly at her waist. Brides, bosses, heiresses, and hotel owners stepped aside before she had to ask. On the center table sat a new white cake crown not with fake roses, but with one black onyx ring and a silver comb catching the chandelier light. Lucian stood at her right, silent and lethal, but everyone waited for Mara to touch the seal first. And when she did, the room bowed to the baker they had once laughed at. If this moment gave you chills, like the video, subscribe for more dark romance revenge stories, and tell me in the comments which scene hit hardest. Mara exposing the fake seal, Celeste losing everything, or Lucian giving her the vows.